From Dhaka, Bangladesh. My name is Nabil Iqbal. I'm a lecturer at North South University, and I'm going to present my paper, COVID-19 Pandemic Perspective of the Holy Quran. So let us start. First of all, what was my motivation behind writing this paper? During the lockdowns, mental health problems became a real issue all over the world, and domestic violence were also rising. And this indicates that people were having a difficult time coping with the pandemic, coping with the new stress. And literature indicates that religion can provide a coping mechanism. And in this paper, we especially want to find the the coping mechanism that is provided in the Quran, the rationale that is provided in the Holy Quran, and that is what we are going to explore mainly in this paper. And we also try to see whether these rationales and logic that the Holy Quran provides, whether this can be understood better, more holistically, using the existing literature. So, to understand the rationale, first of all, we must get some idea of this term collective consciousness. This is a key sociological term, and this indicates the shared beliefs, attitudes common to a social group. For example, if the majority of the people in a country or a community, if they don't believe in a higher power, then that is a shared belief, and that is a part of their collective consciousness. So the Holy Quran argues, or rather it implies in its verses, that uh, when the collective consciousness of a community or humanity, when it degenerates, and that leads to corrupted actions, right? And ultimately, this is connected to the global problems such as pandemics, widespread violence, corruption, or even global warming. So the verse that we are referring to, it's a very general verse, and the idea is very general, that the corrupted actions of human beings, which is a result of the corruption of the collective mind of human beings, right? Ultimately, these leads to these community problems, or global problems. So that's a very interesting perspective, but there is no further detail provide on the nature of these activities, and hence we look into the existing literature. For example, by reading a few newspaper articles, such as the one from DW News here, we found that the disruption of ecosystems, right, the disruption of the habitats of animals and plants, that's connected to pandemics, right? So this gives us a better idea that human beings are, their actions are disrupting the ecosystems. Our, maybe over materialistic tendency, over consumption, that's disrupting the nature, environment, ecosystems, and this is leading to pandemics. So as we can already see, the existing literature can help us obtain a better understanding of the rationale being provided by the Quran. Now, moving on, uh, to understand the degeneration of the collective consciousness better, uh, how does the collective consciousness move to a lower level, let's say, right, instead of moving to a higher level? How can that happen? Well, interestingly, we came across this very famous essay by Sir John Glubb. In this essay, he actually provides a detailed explanation of how this the degeneration of the collective mind of society might take place. And interestingly, it's entirely independent study, not related to any religion. So in this independent study, Sir John Glubb, he finds that when pride, hatred, lack of dedication, corruption, when these becomes more common in a society, right? So uh, these feelings, emotions are dominating the collective psyche. It's dominating the collective consciousness. Indifference to religion, laxity of sexual morals, and so all of these factors can lead to the downfall of civilization. It's a very interesting idea, which actually helps us, which supports the idea of the Quran, and it helps us understand the idea of the Quran much better, right? uh, and and another argument of the Quran is that, so what is the rationale, right? Why does these calamities take place? So according to the Quran, these calamities, such as the COVID-19 pandemic, or adversities in general, they can trigger a movement towards God consciousness, right? So right now, the community, or humanity, let's say, are not very God conscious. They don't believe in a higher power. But calamities such as the COVID-19 pandemic, it can move the collective consciousness towards faith in a higher power, towards God consciousness. So is this true? Is there any evidence of this? Interestingly, in another independent study by Benzen, she found out that during the first lockdowns, during the peak of the first wave, the Google search for prayer reached the highest level ever recorded. Again, this is an independent study, and not related to the Quran or religion directly. So, but it helps us understand, right, what the Quran is trying to imply and say. In fact, it actually supports the argument of the Quran, and uh, maybe this can be an approach for religious scholars, right? We can use research, existing literature, to see whether the injunctions or the arguments of our religious texts, like Quran, Bible, Torah, whether the research supports that or refutes that, right? We can always check that, and that can be a good approach. In this case, it supports the argument of the Quran. So now the next question is, how does the correction of the collective consciousness actually take place? So uh, according to the Quran, the adversities such as COVID-19 pandemic, they can cultivate a sense of humility in us, in communities, in individuals. The arrogance or pride that is replaced with humility, right? So that is an example of the correction that might take place inside the collective minds or individual minds of human beings. And interestingly, humility is not explained that much in the Quran. So to understand humility better, we look into the existing literature once again, and we find that humility is connected to many other positive traits, such as lower rates of infidelity, less exploitative behavior, increased cooperation, fairness, generosity. That's definitely a good thing, if indeed calamities make us more humble, then maybe we get these additional good qualities as byproducts. And in this paper by Wright et al, we get a very interesting perspective of humility. Wright et al emphasizes that humility does not mean being submissive or just listening to and accepting commands. The author argues that humility implies the correct and proper understanding of one's place in this universe and in this world, and which is that we are just a small part of this massive and magnificent world and universe. That kind of feeling and that realization, which is in fact it's the truth, right? Because we sometimes tend to suffer from the delusion that we are the center of the world, we are better, and we are in absolute control, let's say. And maybe difficult times can kind of correct those misperceptions and cognitive biases in us. Moving on, at the end of our paper, we take a micro level perspective. We look at the individual. Some verses of the Quran implies that trials and tribulations can actually help in the development of positive traits, such as resilience, resourcefulness, and we got these positive traits from this paper. Right? Again, the Quran simply implies that difficult times can purify us, and it can remove, let's say, negative qualities, negative tendencies uh, from us. But Walsh, the paper by Walsh, it gives us a broader perspective, right? What kind of positive trait might difficult times give us. So for example, resilience, resourcefulness, these might be developed during difficult times. Interestingly, all the prophets, I think this is true in the Bible and in the Torah as well as in the Quran, all the prophets, they went through very difficult times. Prophet Abraham, Moses, and Prophet Muhammad, they went through really difficult tests and trials. And maybe this is one of the reasons, it made them more resilient, more empathetical, and more resourceful. So that's another very interesting perspective. Last but not the least, the Quran argues that adversities, it can actually help us identify the sincere and true individuals of a community. It can separate the people who are always honest, truthful, about their dedication towards their community. And Levine, in his paper, he identified that during adversities, actually two groups emerge. There is this group, the activists, who are actively involved with tackling the problems of the adversity, and then there are the free riders who just sit back and enjoy the benefits of the activists, or they just play it safe. They don't get involved. Interestingly, this supports the argument of the Quran. So these activists are, in fact, the true and sincere individuals that the Quran alludes to. And ultimately, all of these ideas are consistent with the concept of sabr. It's an Arabic word, a very important concept, a quality that we are constantly urged to develop. And sabr implies doing good, among others. There are other meanings, but one of the meanings of sabr is doing good deeds during difficult times, because it's like during challenging times when life is not going your way, it might be difficult to engage in charity, engage in benevolent behavior, generous behavior. We are instructed to develop this characteristic that even during difficult times we should be doing good. Maybe that is another quality that difficult times can help us develop, and it can also show us which people actually have sabr, who are actually true and sincere, and who are not, right? Anyways, so let's look at the implications of all of our findings, of all of these main findings that we just talked about. First of all, societies and individuals, right, they should see difficult times such as the pandemic, they should see it as an opportunity for self development, for spiritual development and growth. And we should be actually actively engaged in, maybe let's say, looking into our souls, trying to develop our spirituality. because most of the time we are so wrapped up in our daily materialistic life, we have very little time for spirituality, right? And maybe this is a good window of opportunity to for us to restore balance, which again the Quran emphasize very seriously, the balance between materialism and spirituality, right? So maybe it's a good time to restore that balance individually and collectively. And maybe we can use the activists, right, the true and sincere individuals that are clearly marked out during difficult times. We can clearly understand who are the empathetic people. Maybe we can use them, right? Maybe we can give them important roles, leadership roles, community roles. Because sometimes we see this problem, it's becoming a major problem, that the people who actually crave power, uh, they are not always the best of people, right? And we only get to realize that a little too late, when they're already in a position of power, and there's no way to do anything about it. So but during these difficult times, if we can clearly understand, all right, that these people are actually the true and sincerely empathetic people, really caring people. So if we can identify that, and then we can use that to the advantage of the community, for the country, we can give them leadership roles, community roles. And maybe that might be a better way of finding the very good leaders. Last but not the least, the Quran implies that we should actively and seriously guard ourselves and our collective consciousness from being corrupted, from degenerating, right? So we should, be very active, and very proactive, so that our individual mind and collective mind does not get corrupted with the the maybe characteristics that Sir John found out, right? Pride, arrogance, no apathy, let's say, right? So we should definitely guard ourselves from these characteristics. uh, Maybe this can lead to this study, this paper can lead to a new approach to understanding religious texts, like Bible, Torah, and the Quran. We can maybe use existing literature, existing research, studies from sociology, psychology. Maybe we can use these to better understand the arguments of religious texts, right? So that might be a new approach that we can take, or we can popularize. Anyways, interestingly, we also found that since I had physics, biology, economics during my high school A levels, I realized that this corrective mechanism, right? Whenever our consciousness degenerates, right, there is a mechanism. Adversities might lead to the correction of our consciousness. So this kind of corrective mechanism is also there in our cells, right, in our bodies. In biology, for example, when our temperature increases too much, our body has some correction mechanism, right? Homeostasis, it can lower the temperature. When the temperature decreases too much, it can regulate it, bring it back to the normal balance level. So most likely, the Quran is trying to imply that humanity should strive for a balance, between materialism and too much spirituality. Right? Both extremes can be devastating for humanity. It might not be the optimal position. The optimal position is somewhere in the middle. So these difficult adversities can, make that correction, or at least trigger that correction, right? Provide the incentive for that correction. Interestingly, these correction mechanisms are also there in physics and economics. I'm now mainly a teacher of economics. In economics, we see that whenever the market experiences surplus, overproduction, right, automatically the price falls and the market comes back to equilibrium. In physics, whenever the electron becomes too excited, right, it loses energy to come back to equilibrium. So we can see the same kind of correction mechanism across these diverse systems. And maybe this is an indication that all of these systems have been designed by one single designer. And the Quran uh, urges us, it encourages us to study the universe, and this can lead us to the realization of God's existence. And maybe this is just one example. So when we look at these similarities, these connections and these coincidences in nature, as Einstein said, right, coincidence is God's way of remaining anonymous. So maybe this can strengthen our faith, or it can indirectly prove, right, that there is a creator, a designer of this universe, and maybe it can bridge the gap between science and religion, and maybe we can start seeing them as complementary to each other, right, which many great thinkers and philosophers in fact proposed and suggested, right. So they are complementary. Anyways, and definitely there is room for interdisciplinary research, and maybe we can build a unifying model that is best left to the mathematicians and physicists, right. Maybe we can build one unifying equation or model that can explain all of these correction mechanisms across these diverse systems. It's just a thought. Anyways, thank you very much for listening to this presentation. If you have any questions, you can send me an email. I think my email is there in my profile at our website. Once again, thank you for giving this opportunity for presenting my findings. Thank you very much.